3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Voice TV. Tonight, I have a great honor to have with me a dear and special guest, Danae Stratu, visual and installation artist, also a professor at the Superior School of Fine Arts in Athens. An active member of DiEM25 since 2016, and she played a key role of implementing the DiEM Voice platform. She's also a co-founder, together with Yanis Varoufakis, of a media platform called Vital Space, and since recently chairwoman of the steering committee of META, the Center for Post-Capitalist Civilization. Hello, Danae, and welcome.
Hello, Maya. It's very nice to be here with you.
How are you? How are things in Greece at the moment?
Well, things in Greece are not very happy. As for the whole world, I believe things are stressful and it's difficult moments that we're going through. Personally, I'm very lucky because I'm on the island, and of course, you know, I'm near nature, so this is always very helpful and easier to get through this kind of enclosure. But of course, I feel and think of everyone who has to be in a very small apartment in the city in these kind of conditions, and it's hard. Yes. Especially with this authoritarian, you know, our government is becoming more and more authoritarian, and the situation is becoming sort of quite suffocating, I would say.
Yes, and well, yeah, we were talking just recently about your work and the ways that you're trying to cope with the isolation. You've been there for a year now, right? And you have been, of course, working on your projects, but not so much, as you're an artist as me. So a lot of things in art have stopped, and we are now coping with the new situation, the new reality we are living in. And so I think that projects as DiEM Voice are very important for us at the moment, because I think that with these kind of...
Maya, have we lost you?
No, it happens sometimes. Okay. Yeah, I think
we're depending on this technology, and of course it has its problems sometimes. But yes, exactly what you say. I mean, we're trying to still keep our work in mind, to work as much as possible. But of course, many things have been cancelled. Personally, I was working on a couple of ideas on shows that were going to happen last spring. None of that has happened. I was quite fortunate to be able to realize in between the two lockdowns a project in Patras, in the Peloponnese in Greece. I think we'll talk about that later. But of course, yes, and DiEM Voice is a good example, since you asked, because DiEM Voice is the artistic wing or platform supporting DiEM25 from the very beginning. And now it's sort of reintroducing itself in order to reach out to a wider audience. And of course, the need for this to happen was exactly this situation. As so many artists around the world have been suffering so much, having lost all these opportunities, theaters being closed down, exhibitions closing down, everything has been closing down. And of course, the art world was one of the groups of people that were very badly affected. And this was the reason we sort of thought, and I'm supporting also this move, but I think it's coming more from the grassroots of DiEM itself, of DiEM25, in order to re-energize DiEM Voice. and to give a platform for more people to be able to express themselves, their artistic practices, to democratize the platform within the movement as well, because things need time to evolve. And of course, I think this was the right time for DM Voice to expand and to reorganize itself. I hope we haven't lost. There you are. I thought you left me by myself.
Yeah, well, I was also thinking about what will happen with the art in the future, because with the rising technologies and with all of us being in a way dependent on the technology, and you work a lot, and we will talk about your work with natural landscapes and with really large scale installations. And are you thinking at the moment, because I work in the theater, and of course I need theater spaces for my work, and we have no idea what the future will look like. And I think that these platforms are also good for this kind of talk about what art will look like tomorrow. Have you any idea? Are you thinking of, okay, from tomorrow, maybe I will not be able to go somewhere and do these huge projects I've been doing before? Are you thinking about using the digital technologies more in the future? And do you think that it is just another tool where we can talk our ideas through, and that we will have to, in a way, evolve and maybe make different kinds of works of art than we've been used to in the past?
So I think this is a bit a tricky situation, what you described, because I think that this is a bad situation. This pandemic has taken its toll on all of us. It's lasted longer perhaps than we thought, and it's already a year, and it's probably going to last for some time, but it's not going to last forever, and we should not think that it's going to last forever. I think it will, it has changed us, and I don't think we will go, thankfully, back to where we were exactly. As far as ways of expressing ourselves, I think that yes, we will keep definitely some positive things, like not traveling perhaps too much, not having to be everywhere. So we will probably use this to our advantage, the communication part of it. Personally, my work was always a little bit difficult to realize, because exactly what you said, the scale of my project is quite large. So it has always been a struggle to actually realize a lot of the work. So usually the ones that need to happen sort of happen somehow. I'm sure we'll go more into this, maybe showing some examples of works, because it's not always the ideal situation that makes a work happen. It's very often the opposite, that through a difficult situation, somehow it's a little bit magical, the way that a work that needs to be out there usually happens, even under the most trying and circumstances, and not in an obvious way. It's not about money. It's not about that things are easy. It's something else, I think. So it's not like my work is easy. It has been easy throughout the last 20 years that I've been working to produce. So okay, this is. This moment is hard, but I just don't want to lose perspective and think that it will be like this forever. Not that I'm saying that yes, we will keep things differently. Hopefully we will see this as an opportunity to change and to reconsider and to reevaluate what is important in life. The new technologies have been here for a long time, and I think many artists already have been using them. So, and for me, I have been using them and experimenting with them. But on the other hand, I feel it's very important to keep the physical aspect of the artwork. And I think that as you said, you're from the theater background, and I think it's very important that nothing can replace that in a way. So of course, we find ways to to work, and we find ways to express ourselves and our practice to keep our practice happening. When the circumstances, like at this moment, it's different, we will find ways to do it. But let's not forget that the physical aspect, the being together, holding our hands, being able to experience a work from first hand, from proximity, it's a thing that I hope we will be able to have back soon. So not giving up. I'm still dreaming of my work in the land art and with the natural elements that I love doing. I did in October, as I said, in between two lockdowns, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Patra and actually physically create an installation there. We take it as it goes and we don't give up, I believe.
Yes, and that's actually why I did not plan on showing an old work of yours that I really love, and it's your work, The Desert Breath, from 1997. Then it was realized. But then when we were talking a couple of days ago, I realized that I in a way was thinking about the world before mobile phones, the world before mass internet, before drones. When I asked you, we will now see an insert of the project. It's a really huge land art project. It's I think on 100,000 square meters, right, in the Sahara Desert in Egypt. And it is really interesting that I was actually thinking how, while you were doing this project, how it was difficult to realize the project without the technologies, but you did it, and you did it in cooperation with all the people that lived there. And it was some kind of a really great dialogue between nature and the inhabitants that lived there, and you as somebody that is coming at this place and wanting to make an art installation that doesn't have any value in a place that is used to only having built like big buildings that have a value because it's near Hurghada, like a big tourist center. And it is really interesting. So first, if you want, we can see a little video of it, and then we can talk more about it. But it really, in a way, inspired me to talk about how art can, really, in a way, conquer all the situations and all the difficulties we have in life. So yeah, we can see the
choice of the spiral functions on two levels. First, it symbolizes and coexists with the infinity of the desert. The spiral could, theoretically, expand forever, but has a definite point of departure, a source of life, a source of energy. Secondly, it conspires with the way the viewer perceives the work. It is a logarithmic spiral, and so each cone is scaled according to its distance from the central point. The viewer, therefore, begins to walk from the outside inwards. At this point, the cones are approximately twice the height of a human being and have a diameter of 15 meters. As the viewer walks slowly towards the center, the cones successively diminish in scale. This happens so gradually you almost don't realize. At a certain point, while walking the spiral walk, it strikes you that you are now at the same height as the cones. Approaching even closer to the center, to the pool of water, the cones become, in relation to the viewer, almost objects. Then comes the sensation that you have shifted in scale, growing larger as you walk. In this strange inverse way, you start to comprehend the relationship between the human scale and that of the desert. Only after you have distanced yourself and climbed a nearby mountain to obtain an aerial view of the work, does the shape of the spiral reveal itself in its entirety.
I love it, really. I had to show it. The thing is that, in a way, I think that there are two ways with interfering with nature. One is by destroying it and taking it and using it for profit, which I'm looking at the devastation of nature every day here. And of course, that's also what happened to the Egypt coast. And this is a completely different way of using nature and investing your work and everything you have into something that doesn't have any kind of value, any kind of profit. And it's only the only use we have is to, in a way, have some kind of a spiritual relationship with it. And it was also interesting that a couple of days ago we talked about 3 women. The 3 of you women were there in the Sahara Desert doing this huge project, and you were cooperating, of course, with the people there, mostly men. So I would like you to tell us a little about the experience you had, and also about the work of art that still exists now after so many years. In a way, of course, it is disintegrating like life is and everything else.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for showing this and making me travel back so many years. There are many points that I can take from all the things you mentioned. I can start from the last about the way that it was designed from the beginning, not to be monumental. It is maybe monumental in scale, but this was in the need to find a point of where the scale of the desert and the scale of the human being can coexist, which are very two different scales. So this is a starting point on how we designed the distances of walking. So it's about a 20-30 minute walk to follow the spiral pathway going inwards and then going outwards, and realizing it and experiencing it with your body itself. So you can't really see that it's a spiral shape when you're on the ground level, but you can physically realize it whilst following the cones, and which is the spiral pathway. Taking from that, I can say that exactly the fact that it would disintegrate slowly and become absorbed back by nature, that the nature gave life to it, because we didn't go with a pre-designed idea. The idea was that we were 3 young women, myself, Alexandra Stratou, and Stella Konstantinidis. We have to say that, it's a joint project of the 3 of us, and I don't think one person by oneself could actually tackle such a huge thing. So going to the desert basically was like a dream come true in a way, because for us, being Greek, the desert was an infinite landscape that we can relate to from the sea, maybe in Greece. In any case, the idea was that we would travel to different places in Egypt and see if we were inspired by a place, then we would sort of find a way of doing it. So we did not think of that scale. We only thought that it would be something we would like to experience through walking, so that it would be of a scale that it could become an experience and not just a photographic gesture that you can sort of create a circle and then photograph it and take it back to the city. We wanted the scale to be such that we would experience both creating the work, and then the work itself could be experienced by the people that come in touch with it. And saying this, the most important fact was exactly that they didn't want to impose something that would stay there forever, but rather that it would reflect the time element onto it, so it would become absorbed back to the nature. So that was our initial approach to the place. And then, as you said, we traveled there without having a specific these are the parameters we had set that I just explained. And then upon traveling, we met people there. Firstly, we fell in love with the fact that there was this place, as you said, it's on the coast, 600 kilometers south of Cairo towards Hurghada. So maybe it was easier for us to approach this landscape because of the sea that of the sea. The fact that we are being Greek, the sea is an element that we have been living with since childhood, and the desert itself it's a flat expanse of land which is between the sea and the body of mountains. So it's not like the pristine desert that you don't want to touch, because if a landscape is extremely beautiful, there's nothing for you to do there. But it was just a perfect situation somehow. There was a developer on the coast who actually enabled us by giving us the equipment and the expertise of his engineers and workers to work. It didn't cost $1 to create this work. Everything was done in exchange. So they allowed us to stay there in little mud houses. They gave us all the facilities to do this. They thought they had nothing to lose because it could be like a landmark for this new town, let's say north of Hurghada. But the most magical thing is what I was telling you the other day when we were talking about meeting the Bedouin community there, which lives on the foot of that mountain. And actually they were the first people who actually realized the idea, and they thought it was something worth happening, even though, as you said, and as we discussed, it really had no value. It wasn't something that they could take advantage of. Or, however, Hag Ahmed, the head of the community of the Bedouins, he really understood our drawing that we showed him 3 years before it was realized, and he said, "I know where this has had to happen." And he took us in his car, and he pointed us the specific spot, some kilometers away from there. And he said, "That's where it should happen." And it was amazing. And then they helped us by providing us with the desalinated water. I mean, what was left from watering their plantations. They gave us the water with which we wet the sand and compacted it. And they were always there to support us. And it was an amazing relationship. And for me, it was life-changing. And for the three of us, I believe, it was a life-changing relationship. Being for a whole year during the construction time in nature, from sunrise to sunset, in completely different rhythms. So, as you said before, there was no technology back then, no way to communicate with our way of life. So for us, it was also like a way, maybe back then it was also the need to get out of this bubble that we were sort of living in. And we really needed to go away from our comfort zone and do something different. And for me, being in touch with such a different kind of culture, civilization, being in nature, it changed my whole outlook. And I could not, coming back to Athens, I could not contain myself in a studio. So from there, my whole work took this kind of elements of travels. And since a child, of course, I had the curiosity to travel the world and to see what is this world that I'm living in, and to meet different cultures, different people. So this was the beginning.
Yeah, and it was interesting what the Bedouin told you, that for the first time that he thought that women can have a value, not just give children as
Motherhood.
Yeah. Motherhood. Yeah, that was interesting, because it is in a way it was a collaboration between the two of you, because if you haven't come there and did this project, maybe this Bedouin would not realize that he is deep down a feminist.
He himself allowed us 3 young women to come into his house to meet his wife. This was something not done. And then he said, the other nice story was that he said at some point, after months, that he trusted us enough, and he saw that we were working so hard, and we were so dedicated to this idea. He said, I value you as if you were my sons, so which is similar. And then he said, I can see for the first time how women can have a value additionally to having children, to be a mother. So it was all these amazing things that.
And it's interesting, because then this project, it's not just the work of art. It's like all these months of working with these people and influencing them, and then them influencing you. And that's the great thing about visual arts, that most people have no idea what is behind the thing you see in the gallery or in the space or wherever you present your art. And I think that most people don't know that. But with your work, the great thing is that you always have this video documentation where you show not just the project itself, but also this process of working with it from the idea through the realization, and then the project has a much huger life. And I would also like to show another project of yours. It's also a big land installation called Concentric. It's a recent work from 2019, and in the Nirok Sculpture Park in Johannesburg. And for me, this project is really interesting because it is very meditative, which people will see when they see the video, but it actually, in a way, when you think about it, deals with the question of climate change and the question of water and the question of what will happen to our waters if we continue the way we are ruining our planet. So first I would like to see the video, then we can talk a little bit about that. In a way, I think that most people think that visual art is very abstract, in a way, that you can look at it and think of a lot of things. Of course, you can have lots of associations. But the thing I was thinking while watching these videos, there's a lot of them of the project, is about how abstract is the whole problem with global climate change, that we are not actually realizing what we are doing to our planet, and until it happens to us, we will not be aware of what will happen tomorrow with our climate and with lots of catastrophes we will see in the future. So what are your thoughts on this? And also, if you can tell us something about the project.
Yes, I think that one of the biggest crises that we are actually facing is the climate catastrophe. We are bringing this to ourselves, and I think one word is what is behind all this. And unfortunately, this characterizes a lot in our Western kind of living and societies, and it's greed. Greed is bringing this, because we don't respect our planet. We don't respect that which gives life to us, and we just take. And for me as an artist, and being Greek and living close to nature because of the Greek summer, I'm fortunate. All Greeks are fortunate to have this kind of a beautiful country that everyone has access to the sea. So perhaps growing up and being close to nature in this way made me aware of how important it is, and it always gave me a sense of freedom and a sense of happiness. And from the beginning as an artist, even from art school, I started working with the elements, with the element of water, the element of soil, and other things, of course, but these elements were important. And installation, so creating three-dimensional spaces and the physical contact with the natural elements were important to me. Of course, within the process of and the years coming by, and when it was obvious that climate change is really happening and we're creating a disaster for ourselves, I started more consciously, and of course maturing as I was maturing as well as an artist and as a person, thinking more consciously, what can I do through my work to raise awareness on these issues and on this subject. And of course, as I said before, Desert Breath and being in the desert for a whole year, I mean 3 years took the whole project, but for a whole year actually being there in construction in such proximity and just focusing on, in that landscape, sort of led me to incorporate traveling in distant places in the planet. My big project after the desert was on rivers around the world. So I traveled for a whole year on major rivers around the world, in all the continents of the world, in quite difficult circumstances. So it sort of one project led to the next, and it became a way of life for me, to incorporate my work with traveling and the elements of nature. Of course, this led me again, like a circle, to start looking at society and at humanity. And you will see after the rivers, where I traveled in 2003, 2004, I started again looking at human society and the way it interacts, because of course near rivers are what the big cities that humanity has built are around rivers, and water is an element necessary for life. So it's a necessary element that is even now. There's the next wars might be for water, which is something that everyone should have access to freely, right? Air and water is what we need to live. But even that is becoming something that people are like this new oligarchy are trying to sell. I think that soon we will have to pay for these basic elements for life.
Well,
so
yes.
It's important to create work to raise awareness on these issues.
Yes, and it's really interesting that nowadays people are moving back to nature and moving back to the countryside, as for years and years before they were abandoning nature to go into the overpopulated megacities. And that's why I found your project Vital Space Humanity. We're talking about humanity and nature. So Vital Space has two parts of it. One is humanity and the other one is nature. And the humanity part, where you did videos of, I think now Istanbul and Athens, but you plan on doing a lot of other cities.
Yes, it's an ongoing project.
It's an ongoing project, and from this beautiful nature, now I would like to go to the mega cities and to talk a little bit about the overpopulation and about this interesting situation that maybe when we think about the future, this post-capitalist civilization, maybe this civilization will not have mega cities anymore. Who knows what will happen? So yeah, let's see the video. a completely different picture.
I think that basically, I think we have reached a point, not now, for some decades now, that we need to reevaluate as humanity. We need to reevaluate our relation to each other and our relation to nature. We have reached, I mean, we have passed the number of 7 billion people on the planet. Of course, it's a matter of how you distribute everything. There is enough. This planet can sustain much more, but we need to think again of the dynamics of equality, of the way we treat, as I said, our society, the people and the planet, our relationships and the planet. Because what happens is what you said at the very beginning, Maya, about what I said. I used the word greed, which I think is the reason. I mean, one word that I can think, which explains a lot about why this is happening. So for me, yes, this is these crises that are, first it was, we were talking about the climate change in 2006, and then 2008 came, and then we stopped discussing and thinking about the climate change and the climate crisis. We started thinking about the economy, and then all these social inequalities. And so I think that all of these are different phases of the same crisis, which is basically the end of capitalism. And we need to rethink, to reevaluate everything. And I think that to bring the pandemic in this conversation, because it's like the elephant in the room. You did mention before about people moving from the city. And I said that personally, I was lucky and I have the opportunity to be on an island during this lockdown, which is amazing to be here instead of in a very tight city. I see many people doing this, and I think this pandemic gave us the opportunity, because everything slowed down, everything is on pause in a way, for some, not for all. But it definitely gave the opportunity to, it has slowed down a lot of things, from traveling for everyone, right? And so many people's jobs have, they can't work. So many people have found this opportunity, this fallback scenario, let's say, of going back to nature and start planting their food and working with the earth. And maybe this will remain and will give us a second chance to think again of the way that we will inhabit this the planet.
Yes,
and the way we shape our communities as well.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that in a way we have these really overpopulated, polluted cities with terrible conditions of life, which we see not just the mega cities, but actually all the cities. And then we have also a very interesting thing that you also deal with in your work, and those are abandoned places inside the cities, like abandoned factories, abandoned industries. You have cities that were once mega cities. We have this in our ex-Yugoslav republics, a lot of cities that were in a way big industrial cities, and now with the closing of factories, they are just like completely abandoned. And because of that, most of the people are going to the capital to try to find work. And not just the villages, but also the small towns are being completely shut down and abandoned. And you have people living there and not working and living in really poor conditions. And then on the global scale, of course, these abandoned factories have to do with outsourcing of factories in third world countries, where the situation is even worse with the working conditions. So I think that we have the whole spiral of things, why I think that capitalism is collapsing. So I would really like to see your work. It is actually the title of our talk tonight, Upon the Earth, Under the Clouds, because with it, we would start our talk about the abandoned places where you can maybe say something about the world and reflecting the world.
Ο ουρανός που καθρεφτίζεται στο νερό των κιθαριών δημιουργεί το επίπεδο που αναζητούσα από την αρχή. Ένα νέο ορίζοντα που κατά την έξοδο από το έργο ενώνεται με τη θάλασσα στο λιμάνι της πόλης. Είναι μια διαδρομή που μπορεί να εμπεριέχει τη λύτρωση.
The interesting thing is because just to say something about the work, it's a huge site-specific installation in an old oil mill in Eleusis in Greece, and it consists of 1,000 ceramic vessels that are inside this abandoned old oil mill. And it was interesting when I watched first the photographs. Of course, it looks impressive, 1,000 of them, they're huge, is that I thought that you bought them in some kind of a Chinese, you always think a Chinese shop would be the place to buy these vessels, but actually they're all handmade and it took 6 months to make them.
Yeah, so where to start with this? Okay, I'll take it from where you said, because of course it was very a conscious choice to at this moment of crisis for all kinds of jobs, not to go to buy the Chinese ready-made vases or ceramic pots that it would have been maybe one quarter of the cost. But for me, it was very important to energize a healthy cycle for work and the economy, and to give an example of what art can do. When it's done in a way which is considerate. So I was hoping to be able to create them actually in Elefsis itself, which is one of the oldest, very important historically from ancient Greek times. It has an amazing temple, and it was also, it has a multi-layered history, this place, from ancient times into the industrial age, which it's the biggest industrial zone in Greece. All this is now derelict, and so there was also a big movement from people who came from Asia Minor, refugees that supported that industrial zone. And there were ceramics that were being done there, but of course they had all closed down. So I went back, even further back into the roots of pot making in Greece, ceramic pot making in Greece. So I went to Crete. And in Crete, there's this region where people traditionally always made the ceramic pots for the villages. And what was amazing that I learned there is that it wasn't one village that people came to buy the pots. They were nomads. So they would travel from village to village and create the pot from the land itself that people needed at each village. And I loved that story. It was fascinating. And again, there, I had to find, with all my projects, what I think is very interesting, exactly because they involve, people working, and it involves many people working. It's always the most important part is finding the right person, the right people who actually want to get out of what they normally do and to do something a bit out of the ordinary. Because, for this ceramicist, in order to create 1,000 of my clay pots, which were quite large, and I designed the specific pot myself, I went there and we made the first ones, and then he decided to take this. So as you said, for 6 months, he was only creating these pots. And this is because they are quite large, that they needed to happen in zones. So there were 4 zones each, 20 centimeters, then another 20 centimeters, then another 20 centimeters, in order to create the 60 centimeters, that was the whole height. And because it needed to dry enough, but not too much. And in the winter conditions, it's an amazing story. You saw the whole documentary, so you know what I'm talking about. Whoever is interested can go and see from my website.
And also the title of it is, you can say the story about how you gave the title. It's really great.
Yeah, so this was the one aspect of the story of actually really creating these and giving work and creating an example, but also I watched during my research to because that area, as I said, it has a heavy history, and it was very difficult for me to see how can I approach it with doing something that is meaningful and reflects its multi-layered history, the landscape, and all that, without imposing. I wanted something modest, because this is a very poor and modest area in the suburbs of Athens. So I watched, during my research, I spoke to archaeologists, I spoke to the people, from the fishermen, to all kinds of people who actually live and work there. And I also watched a documentary, one of the most amazing documentaries done, of Philippos Koutsaftis, who is a documentary maker. So he was filming for about 20 years, I believe, from the early 70s or late 60s to the early 90s in that area. And he saw the whole transition of how that area completely changed from no electricity, nothing, until it became, as it is today, a modern sort of town. And so there was a character he was following throughout the filming. And this character was a man who was a bit... he didn't have a home. He wasn't exactly homeless, but he was always on the move and didn't have a proper... So he was someone a bit out of the ordinary. So he didn't... Yeah, so he was on the move all the time. And what he did, he was collecting stones that were mostly marbles, and he would leave them outside the archaeological museum for the archaeologists to find them and see if they were valuable and clean them up and put them in the museum. And he did this for like 20 years that the filmmaker was following him. And at the beginning, he was always hiding behind his coat and wanting not to be seen and not to be spoken to and all that. But at some point, I think after 6 or 7 years of this, we see that in the film, in the middle of the film, which is a 1.5 hour film. So actually the filmmaker asks him, Panagiotis, which is his name, Panagiotis Farmakis, where is your home? Where do you live? And he says, he turns around like surprised, and he says, upon this earth, under the clouds. And when I saw this, I thought, yes, this gave me the key to approach and to think of this work in this way, because I felt that I could connect to the fact that we all live upon this earth and under the clouds, and this is what connects us. Because it was exactly, when I started working in that area, I didn't say this to you, Maya, before, but now it's a good opportunity. It was in 2015, that summer, that we had all the, the refugees coming on the boats and being sunk in Greece, and you had all these terrible, disturbing images of the people drowning and babies drowning and being found on the beaches, and they're still on our islands and in very difficult conditions, of course. But those were the first moments that all this was happening. And so I was frozen. So I had started looking at that area, And then I stopped, and for 6 months I couldn't approach it at all. And then I watched that movie that I told you, Agella στους Petra, I don't know in English how it's called, and it then blocked me because of this expression. And then I felt, yes, we're all people, we live on the earth and under the clouds, and some have more, some less, but in bottom line, that's what connects us all. And then the project happened as you saw.
But it's interesting that you're telling me now this, and I didn't tell you when we were talking that while I was watching the photographs before I saw the video, which I thought when I saw the images from above, from the sky, is that they look like refugee camps, actually. It's really weird, but it looks like people standing, under the clouds, and not moving, or even, the tents in the refugee camps. And also, when I saw the images during the night, they also reminded me of these people's waiting. And then, of course, the whole thing with the vessels being at the same time a symbol of life with water and putting water and food in it, but also the symbol of death.
Exactly, because I found in the archaeological museum, I realized that when they were babies that would die very, very young, they would bury them within ceramic vessels probably under their kitchen, under their home. So this exactly was what I thought, that the ceramic vessel, the ceramic pot, is what symbolizes life and death. And the way that I placed the pots themselves, firstly, yes, in a way, I felt that these pots represented the soul of human beings, of these people, of all. And I painted them dark black so that when you fill them with water, it reflects the sky, but also at night, it sort of had this sort of glare. With the moonlight, for example, it had the glare. It's like coming alive, a soul coming alive. But the way that I found to place them, maybe that wasn't visible on the video, was the natural. So there is movement in a way from the way that they're placed, and it's exactly how animals or water find the fastest way to go to the sea, let's say, or to hide in little places. So they're actually placed as a river in a natural kind of flow, very organic. There's no plan in the way that this installation sort of, the formation that it took.
Yeah. Well, now I would like to go to your most recent work called The Memory Threads from 2020, from the COVID year. That was made in the old textile factory in Patras. So first, we can maybe see the video and then talk a little bit about that.
από το 77 μέχρι το 92 που έκλεισε. Δούλευα στον ποιοτικό έλεγχο. Αυτό που είναι
Το πιπίλ το παίρνουμε, διπλώθηκε στο κανάλι. Το βγάλουμε στο πίσω.
Yeah, I really love this work. It's actually also a big site-specific visual and sound installation at the same time. And I love it very much because I was thinking about the nostalgia we have in ex-Yugoslav countries about factories that are abandoned, factories where we had working rights during socialism. Everything was completely different, and everything looked different than today, with the sweatshops and with the terrible working conditions in factories where people work for minimal wage. And this is a really interesting project because in a way it has this nostalgic moment, but also with this salt that you use to show where actually the machines were that we are hearing the sound of. Why salt? That was an interesting. Why the element of salt? I was thinking like the workers sweating, and then with the sweat, the salt going on the ground. That was like my association.
So the salt, it's an interesting question, of course, and it's a natural question that you would ask that. I didn't start with the idea of using salt, and it came, and I will say how. So my initial approach was when I entered this old factory where it was where the cotton would enter from the one side, and through a whole procedure of the production, it would end up on the other side as a thread, and you saw some of the that I found there, some of the thread tubes. And I remember as a child these machines working like giants and creating this noise. So this is why I had the sound of and to bring the memory. So the memory was very important to re-energize the space, to bring back the memory of how it was when it was functioning. So I interviewed many people and asked them to describe the production within that space, the workers that used to work there. And so this was the soundscape, the sound of the machines working and the people describing the procedure of the production. Why salt? So at the beginning, I wanted to trace the footprint of the machines and design it and create the soundscape. But then I walked into that space, and because it was very old, I found traces of, because it had been wet and dry, there were some reminiscence of salt. But then I spoke to someone who was in the production procedure back then, and they explained to me that salt was actually being used abundantly in the process of production, and specifically when the cloth was ready to be dyed, to be colored, they would rinse it out with tons of water, salt water, in order to take off anything, the glues and anything. So it was what made it ready to go to be colored. So I thought, this is the perfect. Firstly, I had found salt particles in the space itself. Then this was explained to me during the explanation of the procedure of the production. And then I thought that salt is of course, it was white and shiny, and it helped me with my work to show the work. But it was most importantly something that preserves food, or for me, it preserves memory for that sense. So this is why I called it memory threads, because it was memories from childhood entering this kind of industrial space that I used to visit with my family, because my family were in the textile industry. So it was, for me, it was personally a memory, but salt symbolically seemed like an element that could express even symbolically these ideas of memory and preserving, and also it comes from nearby that area. So it all sort of clicked together, and it was what made sense for me to use as a material.
And what happened to the workers that you were talking about? What were their memories of the working in the factory?
Yeah, so this was also the reason why I decided, of course, personally, I have an interest for this kind of space, and any artist who works in this kind of way that I do would have an interest in the industrial space. But for me, it was more because this city, as you said before, these cities that their heart was the industry, and all these industries closed down, even from different ways, because it was a socialism where you come from, but for me it was the opposite. But still, it was the heart of the place, and the whole cities, all the people there, like more than 4,000 families were living from these industries in Patra. So talking to them was amazing, because it's still extremely powerful as part of their narrative of what their life was, what it is, how it has ended up, and all the difficulties they are still facing from the collapse of this industrial sort of era. And so it was important for me to do something in there and remind what this place was when it was a living place, and for the people to maybe reimagine a future for this, and to claim these spaces back, because it belongs to people of the town. And unfortunately, they're just closed down. They have been closed down for 30 years. And I'm afraid that what will happen is what happened also in Athens recently in Ellinikon, that they will be sold off for nothing. The people from the city will have nothing to gain from this transaction. It will only go to the oligarchy, and no one has to benefit in their life. So for me, it was important to go there, to do something, even for a second, like within the larger time frame, to energize and bring the memory of what was and the imagination of what can be in the future for the people, and to reclaim, to imagine for themselves what they could do, and if it's worth fighting for, to claim that this whole zone, it's an industrial zone, it's on the waterfront, it's an amazing place. And very recently, as I said, we had this example of Ellinikon, which was the old airport near Athens, and it's one of the most amazing pieces of land in the Mediterranean, and it's been sold to one oligarch for nothing. I mean, for nothing, for use to the many. So this is an example of how art sort of can't change all these inequalities, but it can maybe shed some light and bring the dialogue and the imagination to people.
Yes, and I completely agree with you, because in a way, I think that all of these things we're talking about are actually a thing for the imagining this new post-capitalist civilization that I hope we will live in some days, or imagine it. And I also wanted, because we are talking of lots of segments of our current realities. Of course, getting back our public spaces is one of the most important ones, but also your work, which I also liked a lot, from 2012, The Globalizing Wall. I would like us to see the video and then talk a little bit about that.
of labor to break to cast the old
So the project is a video installation based on a text by Yanis Varoufakis that in a way deals with walls that after the Cold War we expected that these walls would dismantle, but they are actually getting bigger and taller. And the project was done in 2012. You will say where it was done. It was on different locations. But for me, it's very interesting because it was before all of these walls that were built in Europe during the refugee crisis. So were you thinking maybe of adding these new walls to the collection of this globalizing wall? And I was also thinking about these new invincible walls we are seeing now during the pandemic with all the vaccine crisis, if we can call it this way. So for me, it was very interesting to reflect on the situation today with this project, because I think that these walls are not just being physical walls now, but also all of the other walls we saw during the pandemic.
Oh, so many things in this subject to talk about, and it's actually this initial project done was we traveled with Yanis in these divisions around the world in 2006, and the first installation was a photographic installation where, because the idea was I was working on this idea, and that's actually how we met with Yanis and ended up traveling together for a year in these divisions and became a couple as well within, which is quite fun in a way in this difficult situation though of division. We came together. So my idea was to travel on different divisions and stand on the one on the other side and photograph the one on the other side. So the initial installation was of 7 pairs of photographs depicting the 7 divisions around the world. And exactly as you say, back then we thought, but still it was visible that after the Berlin Wall, where we thought that walls would sort of all stop existing, it was the opposite. We could see that walls were being built more and more, and you see many common things if you travel to different places, like the wall in Palestine and the engineers, you saw the gray slabs. I mean, this same company is then built the wall between the Trump wall. And you started looking, you can start seeing connections, and this is what Yanis worked on, and what came after these travels and speaking with all the people there on the field, and that's how he came up with the text, and then later asked me to visualize the text, the globalizing wall, and this followed the original installation, which was the cut 7 dividing lines. And yes, this is what we see, that these walls are getting longer and taller, visible and invisible. And this exactly reflects the situation that we live in, and it's up to us, I believe, hopefully, for us to realize that we are more. We are more than the oligarchs and the people. We have if we realize that it's up to us to come together, to the many, to the people, to come together and make the change, demand the change, make the change, because no one will give it to us. So this is why it's so important to have like Diem and Diem Voice and these platforms that bring us together, that energize this kind of dialogue. And hopefully we will realize that we need to fight for the world we want to live in. This pandemic has exposed, I believe, all these malfunctions that were there before, and it's brought them even more to the surface. But it's not that it wasn't there, as we can see, it's been there with all these wars and the refugee crisis that was even before the pandemic. We could see the walls being built more. Yes, I have thought of continuing this project, and when the time comes and the situation is right, I hope it will. I will be able to be there and do that, because for me, it's very important to actually be there physically. And maybe this connects to the beginning of our conversation about digital art. Yes, of course, all kinds of expression and creativity and art is important, and there is value to it. But for me personally, and this is a personal thing, I feel it's very important for me to be there physically. It's sort of I think it's worth realizing and putting yourself in the position, in the other's position as well. And not being afraid, not staying cocooned in your own little world, but to go there. Because for me and Yanis, when we were traveling in these places, as it was with the rivers and other places that I've been to, you expose yourself, you even endanger yourself, and you realize your life is not much more valuable than anyone else's life. And for me, it was important. It's like a need to be there and see that and be real and true about it, and to understand it in my bones and on my flesh, to see, to really live. I believe that by living in this way, you live more substantially and more fully than protecting yourself from reality.
And also what we were talking about before the beginning of our talk is that a lot of people are afraid to, are of course afraid of a lot of things, but are afraid to get deep into the political issues. They're afraid of the politics. They're afraid of being engaged, not just in a physical sense, but also in all other senses. And I think that this apathy we are living in, where people don't really care about society anymore, is something that I hope will change with this pandemic. If there is a good thing that happened with the pandemic, is that the world in a way stopped, and most of us that wanted, we reflected on our lives and saw what we did wrong and what we did right. And in a way, I think that all of us have to think about things we should change for the society to change as well. So
I think you're so right, and I'm so happy you're saying this. And it's such a huge struggle in Greece. I think so many people from the artistic world, even now, are refusing to stand up and say their opinion and take sides. And this is shocking. I mean, thankfully, that's not the case in the whole world. And I think that what happened in the States and with Trump being, the president for 4 years, shocked Americans and the world so much that many people, actually, as I said before, and as you just mentioned, they had to get out of their cocoon and stand up and say, stand for their opinion and for their beliefs. And this is so important. And in Greece, I'm fighting for this personally as well. And with Meta and Mera, we're fighting, and through DM as well, in order to encourage people and artists to leave their personal, comfort and security and risk, because you need to risk and stand for what you believe and fight for it. Without that, nothing will change, because no one will hand it to us in a golden platter. We need to risk in order to gain. And for the future, for our children, for the next generations, it's a disgrace to leave the planet in such a condition that it will be irretrievable. We need to act, and it's already extremely late. So for me, this is the thing. These are the things I think about and care, and the things that I sleep with in my mind and I wake up with in my mind. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And your last point was very crucial, very important.
thank you, Dana. That was really a great talk, and I really enjoyed it. And I would like to close off this talk by just introducing one of your latest platforms, and that is the Open the Black Boxes. And we will see a short video at the end. It is a participatory digital art project where people can also participate by submitting a single word and answer the question, what threatens you the most, and what are you most eager to preserve in your life? And I think that it's a good point to finish our talk with these two questions. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Maya. And just so that people can actually participate and express themselves by submitting their word, go to Open the Black Boxes and go to submit, and submit every day whenever you feel like expressing yourself or trying to find the right word. It's therapeutic to find the word that expresses best what you're most afraid of or what you want to preserve. So I encourage everyone who's watching to go to Open the Black Boxes and submit their word. It's free, of course, and
Yeah, and also for all the people that would like to see your work, there will be links below on the YouTube channel, so they can go and see all the videos we were talking about during our conversation.
Well, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to speak again soon.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have many amazing guests in the future months, and I'm looking forward to hearing the other conversations you will be having. So I'll say good night to everyone, and thanks for having me, Maya. I really enjoyed this talk.
You are a guest. You too. Okay.
Thanks.